as we consider legislation to reauthorize the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, ensure protections of futures customers, as well as provide much-needed relief for farmers, ranchers, and end users who rely on these risk management tools to keep their operations and businesses above water during these times of high volatility. Before I begin my opening statement, members should be aware that, as is customary with business meetings, all members will have the opportunity to give opening remarks or submit them for the record. We are pressed for time. I also note that our committee rules require a quorum to be present when voting. Out of respect for your demanding schedules, once we have reached a quorum, I will ask members to hold their opening statements or submit them for the record so we may move to consideration of any amendments and then a final vote. I know Senator Brown wishes to make an opening statement, and we will be recognizing him as well as the ranking member. Today is truly a historic day for the Senate Ag Committee, as the last time the committee held a markup to reauthorize the CFTC was over 10 years ago. That's right, 10 years, a decade. Additionally, CFTC's authority expired almost 3 years ago. Obviously, it's time for us to act. Before we dive into the details of the Chairman's mark, let me remind folks what events led us here and why this committee, the Agriculture Committee, needs to take action. First, we need to examine who we are working to help and why they need our help. End users is the common term describing market participants who use derivatives and futures contracts to manage risk. Those market participants include farmers and ranchers, who this committee knows very well. It also includes the businesses and co-ops that help those producers take their harvest to market, a global market at that, as the futures and derivatives markets have grown to include a producer's input costs like fuel, fertilizer, so too has the producer's risk management toolbox. More options for managing risk is a good thing. Now, just look at the volatility in the U.S. corn price. A few years ago, farmers enjoyed prices over $7 a bushel. Now that same bushel is under $4. Again, these producers, along with those up and down the market chain, are who the Chairman's mark aims to help. Now, let's look at what brought us here today. In 2008, a financial crisis hurt the entire economy, including those end users I described. Our congressional reaction to the crisis led to sweeping regulatory change. Many of us here raised concern at that time that the legislation being considered would negatively impact on those who had nothing to do with the causes of the 2008 crisis, and this was a bipartisan concern. Yet when Dodd-Frank became law and the CFTC, then led by Chairman Gensler, began writing new regulations, it was, in fact, that farmer, that rancher, that county grain elevator manager who felt the heavy hand of overregulation come down on them. It has been 8 years since the crisis, 6 years since the bill was passed, and yet there has been no action from this committee to address the impact on end users, farmers, and ranchers from the Dodd-Frank regulation. Well, today that changes. During our hearing last year, we clearly heard from constituents who described in detail the regulatory overreach stemming from the implementation of the Dodd-Frank Act. The Chairman's mark, titled the Commodity End User Relief Act, proposes a compromise and a responsible solution to providing regulatory certainty to end users while increasing customer protections. I'll discuss a couple of examples on how the bill does just that. When writing one of the rules mandating by Dodd-Frank, the CFTC unfortunately limited a routine risk management practice by restricting what is considered a true bona fide hedge. A local grain elevator needs to be able to hedge inventory it may receive when the markets are closed, such as on a Saturday, so they can provide the best price to the farmer. Also, a grain company needs to be able to manage their hedges during a volatile market condition. The Chairman's mark allows for anticipatory hedges and the management of a hedge when it serves as a risk management tool for our producers and commercial end users, and not an investment for speculation. It is our duty to make it easier for those participants who are literally on the ground to hedge or protect themselves, especially with all the recent market volatility. I know that Congress created the Dodd-Frank mandate to regulate speculators and investors. It did not intend to regulate true hedgers in the market. The Chairman's mark does not argue that there should not be a new position limits regime in place. It merely clarifies that farmers, ranchers, and end users should be able to continue to use the markets that they have done before Dodd-Frank and in many prior decades. That's decades. I will say it again, these folks did not contribute, nor were they ever responsible for the 2008 financial crisis, so why have they been regulated as if they were part of the problem? It's pretty simple. Do you want to fight for the wheat farmer that is trying to lock in a favorable price for his crop with his local grain elevator? Do you want to stand up for those who put food on our table, affordable gas in our cars, and provide electricity and heat to our homes? Or do you support the unnecessary and overburdensome regulation? To me, that's a pretty simple answer. Here's another example of how the Chairman's mark provides relief through common sense and compromise. The CFTC has repeatedly stated that the Commission did not have the appropriate data or sound evidence when they determined what the level of swap dealing activity would be to trigger registration. The Chairman's mark directs the CFTC to complete a study on setting that level before adjusting the current policy. This ensures that the market will not further be disrupted until an appropriate level is determined. That just makes sense. I know that there are those who believe the level should be lowered, and I'm not here to argue with their opinions. The Chairman's mark ensures proper due diligence is taken and that the final regulation is based on proper evidence. Overall, the mark before us today addresses this regulatory overreach and provides much-needed clarity and relief for our folks on the ground, as well as putting in place appropriate customer protections in the wake of the disasters of MF Global and Peregrine Financial. It is clear that we should not withhold needed regulatory relief for our farmers and ranchers, and Risk Management Service provides any longer. I appreciate the support of those on the committee who will join me in standing up for Americans, farmers and ranchers and end users by voting for this legislation. I turn now to my distinguished colleague, the ranking member of the committee, Senator Stabenow.